Creative Officer at Burrell Communications. Burrell Communications is one of the leading advertising agencies in the multicultural space, and has been for over 40 years, I believe. Is that correct, Louis?
Almost 50, actually 49.
Oh, wow. So, Louis, just if you want to give the audience a brief introduction and a little bit about your background.
hmm Well, hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. As Beth said, my name is Louis Williams. I am the Chief Creative Officer of Burrell Communications in Chicago. I'm what you call an advertising vet. So let's not get into how many years I've been doing this, but I've been doing it for decades. And my experience ranges from being in a lot of general market agencies. And I made the move to multicultural to actually mentor young creatives in the business. And I have experience in working on all the big name brands. So I've sold everything from putting people in the army to film hygiene. So the whole gamut.
Yeah, that's the beauty of the ad business, right? You get to learn a lot
Yeah.
about a lot of different things.
Thanks, right.
Well, we're really honored to have you here today to continue this ongoing conversation that's happening in our country and across the world. And I think, sometimes folks forget that brands often have a voice in these conversations. And, sometimes they should and sometimes they shouldn't. So, I'll just start out asking you, in this moment, and we've seen some brands slip up and we've seen some brands stand up. Who do you think shouldn't be joining the conversation, and what do you think is appropriate for them to be saying?
Well, I think one of the things we have to understand that we're really looking at a very historic moment in society, and the role of brands in that. When you're trying to make major change socially and historical change, anybody that can help make that change should be welcome, right? It's just that interesting since this is new for all of us, and a lot of brands themselves have not played into multicultural market, especially when it comes to Black consumers. They really don't know how to speak to them or talk to them. So they're stepping into something that they're very uncomfortable to talk about. And at the heart of all of this is racial injustice, which is very difficult conversation to speak about as well, right? So brands are just having a very difficult time in what to say and how to say it. Do I not say anything? Or if I say anything, will it be the wrong thing? So it's a really tightrope that diversity and inclusion department is not going to get you through.
Right. Who do you think are some of the brands who have done it well?
Well, that's just kind of interesting. The brands that I would say who've done it well is that the brands that's been doing it all along. They didn't wait. When you look at a brand like Nike, you look at a brand like Ben and Jerry, they have always stepped forward, whether it was gay rights, women rights, all of that. Those brands are pretty courageous brands. They've always stood up on the side of, social issues and taken a stand. So those brands has been there before. The brands that stumble, again, are the brands that's never played in this space before. So I'm not going to call names, but, you can see the very awkwardness of some of the messaging. You've seen, like, I just throw money at it. You've seen people just sort of like very shallow, statements. And one of the things that these brands doesn't understand is that, or fail to understand, is that who this consumer is out there. This is a very young consumer. This is a consumer that expect more from brands. Already we know that younger consumers like to engage with brands who have more of a social consciousness, right? So, so stepping in, and also the Black social consciousness. I had this little sign that says woke, right? I don't know if anybody have heard of woke or stay woke. A lot of these young Black people are very woke. And woke means like being very aware of your surroundings, very aware how brands treat them. And in this world of social media, you got to think about it is that brands stepped into social media, but not really understanding what that means. You and I were talking the other day. It's like, oh, Facebook says, Louis, it's your birthday. I send it out to my friends, hey, it's Louis's birthday. So we're friends on Facebook now, right? So whenever, I have a birthday and all these good things, and I'm an airline, just say, it's your birthday. Here's $50 off on a ticket to the Bahamas, right? But when something negative or something like this that affects me as a person, and you don't say anything, then I say, well, I thought we were friends. Weren't we friends? You sent me a birthday card. Then I see you silent. You know what I mean? I think so. Brands, this whole thing with social media, the power of Black people on social media, when you talk about Black Twitter, for those who understand or know what that is a very powerful entity. And so they kind of don't, if you're not aware of that and you haven't been dealing with that, then it's very uncomfortable time for you.
Yeah. For those on the call who might not be familiar with Black Twitter, do you want to just give a brief explanation?
Well, first of all, Black Twitter is not a thing. Black Twitter is invisible. Black Twitter, it's not like you can go to the headquarters of Black Twitter. Black Twitter is a community within Twitter. And it's a collective of like-minded people that see something that comes up on the Twitter feed and they attack it. And they have gotten people fired. They've gotten policies changed. They've put people out on Front Street. So it's just the power of social media. And I'm quite sure when Twitter invented Twitter, they didn't think it would be this thing called Black Twitter. And nobody did. It's just a collective of like-minded Black activists, and consumers and users on Twitter that speak up for things that they see that are not right when it comes to handling the Black community.
Mm-hmm. Now, leading up to this, you had been you have tons of conversations with clients all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But for the weeks leading up, you had been having conversations with clients about how do they message around COVID? Do they message around COVID? And then translates into this. So talk to us a little bit about how those two factors have sort of come together and brought us to where we are today.
It's very interesting. This is, I don't know, if I talk to my writers, we probably would say, how would we say this? This is the imperfect perfect storm or the perfect imperfect storm. I don't know which one is best to say. But you got a lot of things happening right here. Now, let's deal with just racial injustice, police brutality. That's something that's been a fabric of America, always there, very invisible. It's always been there. We never talk about always been there. Then we get this pandemic, right? And you get a pandemic that affects us all. All of us had to go under house arrest for 3 months, right? But then you discover that this particular disease or pandemic really affects Black people 2.5 times more than everybody else. So the African American community was already reeling from that, as all of us was, but the AA community was dealing with it even harsher, right? Mm-hmm. So in the midst of all of that, of being ignored, so many stories, maybe later we'll show a PSA, so many stories of Black people going to the hospital was turned away, right? And I was looking at the news the other day, and this young man had lost 6 family members to COVID, 6. And that's a lot within a 3-month time, right? Mm-hmm. Then on top of that, you have the crisis that happened in Minneapolis with Mr. Floyd. That just was too much. And that was as my grandmother would say, the straw that broke the camel's back. Mm-hmm. It was the match that lit the haystack. With all of those things coming together, right? All that pent up anguish, the racist undertones of that, and just the graphic video. And we talked about this, Beth. It's like what made this video so strong is that you actually saw people's faces. Normally, when you see things like that, it's grainy film, it's shadowy film, but you saw the 2 different worlds, and you actually saw a man lose his life right in front of you. And that gave this particular incident and made it very different from all the others, because we can go back to Trayvon Martin, you know what I mean? We can go back to all Sandra Bland. We can do all of that. So it's been happening, right? So when all of this kind of came together at this one point in time, and that's that imperfect, perfect storm that we talked about, and it just blew up. And be honestly, I thought this was going to be a crisis. I thought they was going to, especially where it happened in Minneapolis, there's not many black people up there, so I didn't think it was going to like get much traction. You know, I just started me hang around for maybe a day or two, but this crisis turned into a revolution, and a global revolution at that. So we really an uncharted territory for human beings, period, and even more so brands.
And what is your thought on the authenticity of the brands who are coming out now? Aunt Jemima, Uncle Ben's, Mrs. Butterworth. You know, these representations have been around forever.
Mm-hmm.
And I always found to be quite striking that they could continue to exist. How authentic is it for them to come out now and say it's wrong and try to change their perception?
Well, it's better late than never. You know, and the question is, why have we allowed that to happen? I mean, right? I mean, they've been making money of Aunt Jemima, Uncle Ben's for years. But why? The question is why we never question the brands. You know what I mean? So everybody kind of has a hand in this thing. You know, we're looking at brands, but I wrote this down the other day about brands are people. No, brands aren't these things that you just go to the shelf and buy off. Brands are people. It's all of us on this call. Brands are people, right? And so a brand will react like the people who run the brand. So if I'm the president of Aunt Jemima, and I would have gone in there, been somehow somebody dropped me out of the sky, you know, last year and said, Louis, you're the president of Aunt Jemima. I was like, well, first thing we got to do is change his name. Right, that's the first thing I would have done. Right, brands are people. Brands are not these autonomous things that's on your shelf in the grocery store. And the thing is that why haven't we done something about that? And don't put it just all on the brands, but you know that's been an awakening. See, we woke now, right? So we woke up. It's been in front of us for years, and decades, and centuries, but we woke. You know, when you think about the Confederate bases, you know, named after Southern Confederate generals, and all these statues of the Confederate people just up in the town square that just pigeons been pooping on for decades, and nobody thought about it, right? Now they've been toppled. So it's just awareness, right? You know, one day you get it, you know, one day you don't get it, and the next day you do. So the thing is that we're here now, brands are here now. My biggest thing to brands is that where do you go from here? You know, I mean, I want to know, and I would love to, hopefully we're recording this and we just like this day next year, we're going to, you know, see what brands are doing, whether or not this was a moment in time and everybody went back to where they were. But there's something very different about this one, something very different about it. So it'll be interesting to see how brands are going to react going forward. Because right now it's kind of chic to be. It's like when Obama won president, you know, a lot of my white friends said, I voted for Obama. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, do I suppose to give you a star? You know what I mean? But it's like, you know, so when this happened, you know, my company, we gave Juneteenth off. You know, I mean, things like that. So what are you going to do next year? I think that's going to be important for brands. If you did something or you didn't do anything, doesn't matter. What are you going to be doing moving forward? And what are you going to be doing a year from now?
We talked about this a little bit the other day, and I'd love for you to share with this audience why you think it is different. And I agree with you. It feels, for me, it feels very different as well. But I'd love for you to share your thoughts on and what makes this different.
I was listening to a NPR podcast called Code Switching, and they talked about that. Why now? And the title is Why Now, White People? Why now? And it was very interesting. And then I asked everybody to please go check it out. It's 28 minutes. Really, really nice. It talked about because white people are involved. You know, it's like, so it's like all of a sudden now, it's not all of a sudden, but there's been this awakening that when you saw the peaceful protests, you know, you saw it was much more than black people. A protest happened 50 in every 50 in all 50 states, right? It happened. I remember this one little white boy. He was just by himself in the suburbs with his own protest. It's touching people that hadn't been in the game before. Brands have never been in the game before. So there's a momentum coming from non-black people that's pushing this. I mean, right? We're seeing CEOs and presidents and everybody, you know. And it's also interesting that the government is not, it's like MIA, right? Mm-hmm. So the government is MIA. So who does the public look for change? So unfortunately, since the brands have interjected themselves socially in the social conversation and became my friend on Facebook, now I'm looking for you to engage more, right? Not just for, you know, it's not a one-way street anymore, right? So the government is MIA. So who's in power? So unfortunately, I look for corporate America, which is brands. Mm-hmm. So what can you help me do, Mr. and Mrs. Brand, to make this right? So that's why it's really, really different. And you know what? And brands have responded. Now we can give you a grade of good, better, and best. But for my take on it, if you in there and you're trying to make a change and you maybe it wasn't the best way to say something because it's awkward, that's okay. But you are doing something. Everybody felt as though they should do something. And I've been on the calls, I tell you, with about 7 or 8 major brands. And I'm speaking to people that was so high up in the Ivory Tower, I thought I'd never, you know, meet these people. But they are engaged in a way that they're not. And that's why it's different. You know what I mean? Everybody has a role in this. It's not the person down the street. It's not those people who live over there across the tracks. We feel like America, we need to come together. Everybody wants this to change. In order to change, it takes all of us. That's what's different.
Yeah. And, you know, you mentioned brands being people, and we talked about this the other day a little bit in the context of Starbucks and questions coming through in the Q&A in the context of Taco Bell. And, you know, folks are coming to work with the Black Lives Matters t-shirts and being fired or sent home. Mm-hmm. What does that do to the other voice the brands are putting out there in the paid media when this is how they're treating their employees?
Well, what it basically says that you can't be trusted and you really don't mean what you say, right? I mean, you got to think about it's so many things have been done that's been walked back. We're going to say this, then you walk it back. So no one really truly trusts you. And that's why I said I want to know what brand's going to be doing a year from now. Mm-hmm. So Starbucks, for instance, you know, they had a couple little issues, you know, in a couple of their stores. And I remember they shut down every Starbucks in the country one day. People was pissed off because you couldn't get your Starbucks. So, you know, everybody's like, ah! So, okay. So you shut down your entire franchise, you know what I mean, for an education about race. Then you come back. And at a time like this, say you can't wear that. It's sort of, that's why there's this lack of trust that African Americans have with people and with brands in this country. So it's very important for brands to be consistent. If you feel this way, really make sure you feel this way and be consistent. If you don't like me, that's okay, but at least I know that and you're very consistent with that. But don't act like you're on my side one day and then you flip and you're not. That's the worst thing you can do. So stay on one side or the other. But, you know, that's again, role of brands not comfortable navigating this space. I'm quite sure if it would have gone through the right people there, somebody would have called that out. It's just like there's a major bank. Tomorrow is Juneteenth. And I don't know why we're celebrating that. We never celebrated before. You know, and all of a sudden we're celebrating Juneteenth. And this major bank is closing early. So the first thing I say, you can see the goodwill for that brand. Okay, we're gonna close early. Then I go, why you close early? On Memorial Day, you shut the whole damn thing down. Why are you just giving us a half a day? You know, it's like, don't take, are we just gonna close early? We're not gonna close it. We're just gonna close half a day. So it's like,
Right.
so what does that mean? You kind of like Juneteenth, or you kind of not. So just brands just be very just aware, and it's really 101. Really, it's just simply read the email, and then read the email you think, get the position, take the position where you're on the other side of the email, of you receiving that email,
Mm-hmm.
you're receiving that communication, and try to put yourself in the place of the person you want to actually reach, and then try to get their point of view on
Yeah. And along those lines, we actually have a question here from
it.
Sharice along those same lines in the context of the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
So she's asking about the conversation you have with clients who don't want to alienate those who are not woke. And her example is, good old Roger releasing his statement without any mention of Kaepernick.
Yeah, I mean, they took it right. I mean, God, they took that one hard. And that's another thing about why this sort of is so different. And I know if you watch social media and you saw the image of Mr. Floyd and the policeman, and you saw Kaepernick kneeling, it's almost the symbolic, the symbolism from Kaepernick's on one knee, and then the guy being on the knee of Mr. Floyd. They sort of line up next to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And, I have on my Kaepernick jersey just for everybody to see that today. I wore that special
Excellent.
today. But it's sort of like, it brought everything, like, this man said the right thing, right? He had a case, but America, the president, everybody went against him, right? So when you see that happen, it just really just sort of obvious of, like, really what's going on there. But when the person has to walk that back, and again, you got to think about it. How can you say, that, Mr. Commissioner, and not mention that man's name?
Mm-hmm.
Now you see what he's done. Now he's saying, he's asking teams to, give him a tryout. But that's the pressure he's probably getting from the white owners. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? He could do as much as he could, but he didn't want to push it all over. Because here's the thing that I've kind of figured out here. It's tough for brands, because brands have a bigger picture, right? I don't want to piss off somebody that I may have, say I got, I'm getting something shipped over from China or whatever. Or I got some kind of policy that I need to get through that's going to help my brand, right? I don't want to piss off the people that in January that I may have to ask to help me get this bill passed, right?
Right.
Because they may look, you come to the table like, oh, I remember back in the summer when you said this. So maybe I'm not going to lobby for you not as hard. You know what I mean? So we're looking at it like, what you're going to do now from a brand perspective. They're looking at Wall Street. They're looking at the people on the board. They have, I have a brand, right? But, a Black Lives Matter activist and a mega activist may love the same brand. So which one I want to piss off? So they gotta walk this catwalk, and we understand that. But you can't be as obvious as the NFL commissioner was, and not mention Kaepernick's name. And he was cream for that. He was cream for that. So, but again, you just got that lack of trust once again was played out, right? So,
Right. Right. And sports are brands too, right? And one of
hmm
the biggest moves we've seen from sports overall was NASCAR coming out and banning
hmm
the
hmm
Confederate flag.
hmm
Is that a meaningful stance? Is it even a viable move on NASCAR's part?
Well, I was really surprised. I was born and raised in Georgia, so I've been to Atlanta 500 a couple of times, and um, if you don't have a Confederate flag, you look strange. So, um, but what it shows you is why this is so different this time, because that's the heart of Confederacy. And to take that symbol away, or to just even, say ban it, it shouldn't be seen here, was really huge. So it just lets you know that this is really different. This is serious. Again, we're going to see what's going to happen. Will it creep back? Is it going to be backlash? I mean, because there's a very passionate, when it comes to money, there's a very passionate. The NASCAR fan is very passionate, right? So we're going to see. But again, I think brands is a lot of brands are making bold statements, and I have to say that was a very bold statement for NASCAR. So it's setting the tone for brands too. It's upping the ante. A lot of brands thought they could get off pretty easy. Well, let me send, $100,000 to NAACP and we're cool. Then somebody comes like, I'm going to send 10 mil. Boom. And somebody says, I'm going to send 100 mil. Boom. And somebody says, I'm going to send 1 million. Boom. And somebody says, I'm going to take down this statue. Boom. Somebody said, all of a sudden the brands, the cost of entry into this conversation and what you're going to actually do, it's a whole different thing now, right? So brands, when you get in this conversation and you start thinking about it, you got to really understand what's going on. You just can't come to the table with peanuts and think you're going to get a little check that's going to get you out of this thing. You're not going to buy your way out of this, right? Mm-hmm. And people, and the young people are looking for actions, because as soon as you post something in social media, they're going to immediately check you out. You know what I mean? They're going to check you out. You know what I mean? And they want to know what you're going to do. So you're really going to have to come to the table and really think about actions.
And, I go back to that idea of authenticity when you talk about the different types of actions that brands can take. And, we talked, some brands are pulling commercials that have African American representation in them. Some shows are sort of pulling personalities that might have more white supremacy type undertones to them. And then there's all the dialogue around, these brands are putting out the money and taking these actions, but you look at their board or their C-suite, and it's, the old white men. So again, where does the authenticity come through? Can they make these moves in a way that resonate with people in real terms?
That's up to the brand. I mean, and just some brands are more comfortable in this in this conversation than others, and it's telling. That's all it is. It's and it's going to be growing pains, because again, we've never seen this before. Brands have never had to engage with their consumer like this ever. So there's no playbook. There's no silver bullet. There's no right answer. There's no one answer. We're learning this thing for the very first time, all of us. And, like my biggest thing is that as a brand, you have to ask yourself who you are, and you have to stay true to your brand, and just be authentic from that. Now, you know how social media is. I mean, Jesus Christ can come down here and they're going to criticize him. You know what I mean? So you got to be able to take your licks, right? But if you believe in what you're doing, and you've been, true to your brand and true to yourself and true to what you believe, you have to stick to that. And I think sometimes we kind of going a little bit overboard by doing some of the things that we're doing. That's sort of like, okay, that's a nice gesture, but is that going to really do anything? So brands make sure you just not do anything that's a gesture that's not going to really lead to a bigger change. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, we're going to do this. You're like, okay, So we really, this world needs actionable, change, not just a gesture.
Right. That's a very hopeful, and it goes back to your your comment, let's come back here a year from now and see
Hmm.
what the
Hmm.
conversation looks like.
Hmm.
You had a couple videos that you had sent along
Hmm.
to share. Do you want
Yeah, I mean,
to
it interesting about when I was saying about this crisis and now it's moved to a revolution. I got a call, I got an email from LinkedIn from a young lady in the UK, and she was saying, Lewis, I don't know what to do. And she's black, but she sounds British as hell. It's really cool, you know. So she's like, I don't know what to do. She said, I'm stressed out because every general market agency in the UK, I don't know if they call them general market in the UK, but it's calling me. I'm getting calls from and she didn't know what to do. So she reached out to me because I guess you've seen some of my articles and things. And she just wondered, like, how do I deal with this? And one of the things I said to her was that, first of all, you must tell all your friends is that I don't have all the answers. I mean, they call the one black person they know. It's like, tell me what to do. It's like, I don't know. I mean, I can only give you my opinion. But what I
right.
can do is point you to other places, other experts. It's so much information that's out there, that's been out there for years around this. But we
Mhm.
just haven't taken the time to study it and get comfortable with it. You know what I mean? So that's the first thing I told her to do. But then she sent me a video from a young filmmaker in the UK, and I gotta say, it is one of the most powerful videos I have seen. And and it in the podcast I talked about it. It was talked about why this is so different because this really touched all of us in a place, black, white, green, yellow, blue. It's touched us in such a way. And this, if you could play it, but this film is about mothers and basically how a mother feels when she loses her son.
Great. Let me share my screen.
Okay.
Can we enable screen sharing? Great, thank you.
We can't hear anything, Beth.
Are we not seeing it?
We're seeing it, but I'm not hearing anything. Um, or if you could we can put the link in the chat and so people can see it on their own. It's
Yeah.
fine. You know what I mean? But you take a look at that, and it is one of the most powerful films. And this young lady felt like she said I needed to do something, right? And so, as a filmmaker, she put together this clip, and it's powerful. And I think that's what brands can do. It's going to take all of us, and it's really nice that I think now that the brands can do so much more that the government can't do. So, I mean, you look at the role of brands again, since you're my friend and you care about the consumer, we all know everybody, we are from the brand, we know that consumers have a better relationship and feel better about the money they spend with their brand when they know their brand is doing something, whether it's climate control. You know what I mean, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whatever it is, whatever you're doing to make this world a better place, we feel better about you as a brand. That is your consumer mindset today. And so this right now is one of the biggest things facing us. And so, brands, you should step into it. But I think it'd be good for you and a great learning and a great thing to be more than just a transactional relationship between you and your customer.
Yeah. The other concept that I thought was really interesting that you talked about is this idea of the cultural tourist.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share a little bit about your thoughts on that? And
Yeah, it was, that was a headline on the cover of Ebony magazine once, and it says, America loves black culture but hates black people.
mm,
And when you think about, it's like, okay, I like to work out to Beyonce. Okay. So that means you're not a racist now. That means that you're cool with black people. You know what I mean? So, and that's what a
Hmm.
cultural tourist. I like black music. I can recite everything Most Def said or whatever you want to say, right? And I can do the lyrics right with them. So, okay. Okay, I eat sushi, but I'm not Japanese. You know what I mean? So being a cultural tourist means that you kind of pick and choose those things out of a particular culture that you think are cool, or that make you think you look cool, or to make you sound cool at a party, but you don't buy into the people of the culture, or you don't buy into the
Hmm.
entire culture. And that's called a cultural tourist. And that's what brands do when I kind of give you a token, right? Or I kind of do a little bit and not enough. You're just doing enough. So being a cultural tourist, a lot of us just not aware that we're doing that, right? You're just not aware that you're almost patronizing a culture, right? So just be aware that when you say I like Beyonce and I like to work out to her, okay, that's just as far as that goes. That does not mean you're part of the Bayhive. That does not mean, you know what I mean, that,
Right.
that you're cool with everything else. It's just simply like you just like Beyonce. But don't let it go any further than that. Just be aware of that. So don't be that cultural tourist. And that's how Americans are. We know we go anywhere and we just want to take over country. We go to the sites and then we say, oh, I've been to France. Where do you go? I went to the Eiffel Tower. Okay. Right? You know what I mean? I went to the Louvre. Okay.
And then you had
Right? But
dinner at McDonald's.
I had dinner at McDonald's. So now but I can't speak a word of French, and but now I know French culture. You know what I mean? So that's
Yeah.
not how it goes. You have to really respect the culture. And here's the thing about Henry Louis Gates said this about culture. If you're interested in it, then you can learn it. But you know what I mean? If you're interested in it,
Hmm.
it's nothing that keeps you from that. If you want to know black culture, you want to know Japanese culture, you want to know LGBTQ culture, if you study it and respect it, you can learn it. You'll never be it 100%, but you can learn
Excellent.
it.
So we have some questions coming in.
Uh-huh.
There's an interesting question here, and we've sort of tapped into it a bit, but I think this goes a little bit deeper.
Hmm.
Asking what best practice can you recommend for saying something meaningful without sounding phony or pandering? And really, the question goes to if support for a cause doesn't marry well to a brand, are you better off keeping quiet or just staying out of the conversation look worse than saying something inauthentic?
I read that first part of the question because I think the answer was in the question. Can you read that very first part and say,
Yeah, the first part was what best practice can you recommend for saying something meaningful without sounding phony or pandering?
hmm well, I think that's the answer. Don't say anything that's pandering. I mean, I don't, you know what I'm saying? It's like, if you're able to recognize that, then you're able to recognize it. I mean, I think one of the things we have to remember, and I say, and I've been in a lot of conversations with a lot of people, I'm sorry, my wife is going to grab that, is that um, it's okay. You know what I mean? It's like, you're not going to be perfect with this, right? It's just the meaning behind it. Um, and if something sounds pandering, then it probably is. And I think the actions that you take, um, the closer you can get to what the brand is about, the better. You know what I mean? So if I make music, right, then I may want to do something for uh, you know, get kids to go to the music back in public schools, for instance, right?
Mhm.
If I make cereal, if I'm from one of the food companies, I may want to do something with, kids that's not getting fed since, a lot of kids are not going to school and a lot of the kids are not getting fed now. So look at who you are as a brand, and there's so many things that could use your help. And it's hard pressed for any brand in this world to not find something that they couldn't align with that fits their brand. It just isn't. It's too many things. But you have to do your research. It's very easy to cut a check to NAACP. It's just like, I don't know what to do, so I'm just going to write a check to the United Way, right? You know what I mean? But maybe there's a food bank down the street. Maybe maybe you need to go local. You don't have to go national, right?
Mm-hmm.
But to me, there's no brand that exists today because all brands have consumers. And if you follow your consumer, you understand who your consumer is, should be your answer. And then you do something for that consumer or that consumer's community, and you'll be right on. So again, I think sometimes we're looking for these answers to be these big things, and they're these little things with just a little bit of thought behind them. So really, honestly, just think about it. You know what I mean? It could really be that easy.
So you don't really see a situation where you would advise a brand to just stay quiet?
I wouldn't. I mean, if you're going to stay quiet, that's a choice. I mean, that really is. If you may say, you know what, if I decide to stay quiet, but don't stay quiet because you're afraid to say something. Stay quiet because you don't have anything to say. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's part of the thing here is that we talked about, silence here is not golden. You know what I mean? Silence speaks, right? So if you really say it's best not to say anything, then you must ask yourself, do you really care? Because you're more concerned. That's about you, right? It's about you. If you're going to be quiet because you're afraid that somebody's going to say something bad about you, then that's about you. Mm-hmm. That's not about who needs help. It's about you as a brand. So that's your ego that you're afraid to get bruised. Mm-hmm. That's the heart of that. That's really at the heart of that. I'm not trying to be cold to anybody out there. But when you think about it, that just occurred to me. When you think about it, that's about you. That is not about your consumer. If you care about your consumer and you care about what's happening, you'll say something. And here's the thing. You don't have to go on Twitter, Instagram to let everybody know you're saying something. You can just do something. You know what I mean? You don't have to say, I'm getting ready to do this. You can just simply do it. You know what I mean? I don't have to say, brand X is giving $500 million to the homeless. I can simply just come in there and tell everybody, today we're going to help the homeless. Mm-hmm. But we want to post it on Twitter. We want to post it on Instagram. We want everybody to know what we're doing. That's okay. So if you're worried about getting blowback there, don't go there. But that should not keep you from doing something.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. Well, along the same line, so we have another question as it's related directly to influencers. Mm-hmm. So, a lot of influencers have come out and their voice is really calling out brands on what they're doing. The example given here is Starbucks and the NFL. Mm-hmm. Do you see that? So they're calling them out, not necessarily for anything egregious, but just for not saying anything at all. Do you see that continuing? And I guess you've kind of answered what you would recommend to the brands is saying.
Yeah,
but do the influencers go ahead.
Yeah, but I think that's just the world we live in, social media. Everybody has an opinion. There's just boo birds. There's trollers. We got names for people. Mm-hmm. It's just, you know what I'm saying? It's sort of like everybody's not going to like you. Right. Everybody's not going to like you. Are you going to concern yourselves with the people that don't like you? Are you going to try to make the people like you that don't like you? And influencers, everybody has their own agenda too, right? Those influencers want to get views. The influencers want to get noticed. You know what I mean? So it's very easy to go and call out people, to get noticed themselves. So a lot of that is just about the influencer themselves. Mm-hmm. Wanting to get noticed, and they find an easy target. So they go for you. But that, you know what? You all pushed all these agencies, like, we got to get in social media, digital. We got to go digital. If you're not in digital, you're out, baby. So guess what? You got what you asked for, so deal with it.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So you can't, we've been pushing this, pushing, social. Okay, now you all in it. You just didn't expect that you was going to have to deal with something like this. But now you know. That's back to, this is historical. This is educational. Brands had to look at themselves. Brands had to look like how they respond to something like this that's bigger than us, that's dealing with the community as a whole, the nation as a whole, society as a whole. I got all kinds of employees. They may not be on the same page. I got vendors. I got, political, foes and allies. I got all these things. So we're going to walk on the other side of this, and we're going to be stronger for it. And your diversity and inclusion department going to be at a whole nother level. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's not about walking around counting heads. Okay, there's one. There's another one. You know what I'm saying? There's a whole book been written on this in school right now,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's all very true. But advertising is commercial speech,
Yeah.
and we're spending this money. As I say to my students, anytime an advertiser spends $1, they want to get at least $1.01 back from that spend. I think something that's not that long ago, but maybe long forgotten in the light of all of this was Cheerios was one of the brands that really kind of started this from the perspective of their biracial couple ad. What was that, 2013? I think it was.
I remember.
So, I love the idea of, you're going to make mistakes and be willing, to trip along the way, that it's more important to be part of the conversation. But what happens when that starts affecting the bottom line?
Yeah, that's what it's all about, right? So that's why you try not to make those mistakes. You know what I mean? So what you want to do is like, right? I mean, it's, you can have the best, Steph Curry is a great 3-point shooter, but he don't make them all. You know what I mean? So, but the thing is that prepare yourself, bring on board as many different diverse thinking as possible and people in the room. And that's why diversity in your brands and in your agencies, at your companies, is so important, so that you have all these different points of view. It will minimize your risk. You know what I mean? It gives you, so often the problem is that you don't have the diversity in these brands and agencies. So you have very limited perspective, and that's what gets you in the biggest trouble. But if you begin to go back to the issue, I mean, this is all about looking back at ourselves as a brand, as agencies, and all of that. Start looking at how you're built, so that one person can raise their hand and say, oh, thank you. And see, that's the problem. See, this is pointing again back at the problem, but we're not looking at ourselves. We're always looking out. We're mad. Okay, we're mad at the person that's like, we're going to stumble, but we're not looking at why we stumbled. You're looking at why you stumbled because you were not as diverse as you should have been. You didn't have enough different point of views around the table to view the work, to talk about the work, to talk about what we should do. That's the underlying problem that we're having. You know what I mean? And so, and the companies that stumbled the biggest were those companies that was like that. Nike, as soon as this happened, Nike was the first people to be out there. Boom. You know what I mean? They was out there, and then all of a sudden, everybody just went to black boxes with white type. All of a sudden, okay, the way to post this is like, we got to put just white type and put some supers on it. And that's a whole thing. I don't know if people seen the Google document about, some activists just taking all the brands together and just put them all next to each other. They did 100 of them. It's very interesting. There's so many white type on black boxes. Is part of it had to do with the pandemic. Part of it had to do, the quickness to get it out there. But, it's sort of like, it's just interesting. It's very interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So I know you don't want to call out brands in
Uh-huh.
particular, so I will. um, and so one brand that did come out and say something and stumbled famously for it was L'Oreal, and really getting the fingers pointed back at them in terms of not walking the walk. So again, staying on this line of reasoning that it's okay to stumble, how would you advise them to get back up? How do they recover
Hmm.
from
Right. Yeah.
the colossal backlash that they got?
Right. And it's like for all the parents in the world, you tell your kid it's okay to fail, but you don't really mean that, you know? So when I say to brands it's okay to stumble, I just don't want to. I don't want you to tell. You know what I mean? I'm a parent, so I want to let you down easy. You know what I mean? It's like, you know. So it's just again just one of the things that I got to give like the commissioner some props for, but he just didn't go all the way with it. If he would have done it with Kaepernick, it would have been perfect. You got to admit your mistakes. You do it quickly, you correct it, and you come back and you do something actionable about it, right? So that's the whole thing is that I remember when, you go to a lot of people and they talk about why they won't hire more minorities, and they'll say, well, I hired this one and it didn't work out so well, so they don't do it again.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So don't say just because, but we went out there and tried something and we kind of stumbled or fell on our face, so we're not going to do it again. As opposed to saying, look, we learned from that and just get up, dust yourself off, kick yourself in the butt, and hopefully you can go back and learn from your mistakes and get back in the saddle. Because if it's really about what you're trying to do, that's what you would do. If you stumble or fall on your face and you don't come back, then that really says that you really weren't in the game for real anyway.
Oh,
That's what it tells me. Oh, we did, it was so dangerous, so we don't want to do that again. That tells me that you really not really, really committed to what you acted like you were committed about. And people are looking at that too. I mean, because everybody has made a mistake. It's sort of like, how do you come back and say, you know what, I was wrong? And a lot of companies do that. I was wrong. We did something. We're going to fix it. But again, it's you're not going to be the first one to do it, and you're not going to be the last one to do it.
right, right. One of the debates that's raged in the advertising industry for forever is this idea of, are we reflecting culture or are we shaping culture? How would you think about that debate in this context?
Some brands reflect, some brands create. The more courageous brands, you know what I mean, help create culture, and others sit back. Now, you always got early adapters, just like in the consumer, right? You got early adapters. You got the ones that go out and reach, and you got ones that wait for everybody else to get going. And I use this analogy 3 years ago or 2 years ago when Nike came out with the Kaepernick ad. And so we all on the beach, right? And we see Nike out there swimming by itself. That shark in the water, nobody dare goes, right? Then all of a sudden, fast forward to today, everybody, oh, let's get in the water. Let's get in the water. Everybody just get up on the beach and just this storm of people just run and get in the water because it's fine now. You just got different kind of brands. Some brands are more Americana. You know what I mean? And they don't do that like that. Some brands have always, from the very beginning, started out courageous. And another thing that's happened too is like you got some brands that's over 100 years old. You know what I mean? You got brands that started in the 1800s. Then you got some brands that started in 2005. I mean, how old is Google? You know what I mean? How old is TikTok? You got some brands, that's bigger than brands that was, created in the 1800s. And those brands are ran, when I talk about brands being people, Those brands are run by entrepreneurs that came from a very different place. They got their entirely different way. And they have a very different outlook than some of the more older, more established brands.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the brands probably you're going to see being a little bit more courageous, a little bit more of setting the tone for culture as opposed to reflecting. They're going to be the early adapters because they just was born in the last 25 years. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
they don't have this whole thing about Americana. They wasn't here when we wanted to pick one in World War II and we gave out candy bars, and we weren't here when everybody was driving big old cars with V8s and with gas was 35 cents a gallon and all of that. You know what I mean? It was like my first car, Tesla first car. Never, it's all electric. You know what I mean? It's sort of like a very different thing. I want to say, here's a car company, you know what I mean, that's sending something up to space. You know what I mean? Car companies are no longer car companies anymore. They're something else. You know what I mean? So we've got to look at the brand and who you are as a brand, your history as a brand. And it's hard to turn a big aircraft carrier around. You know what I mean? You've made your reputation on being American and apple pie. Everybody needs to be together. Or you created you created yourself from the very beginning, one of those revolutionary brands, right? And you came out the gate like that. That's what people expect of you. That's what people have always seen from you, and they're not surprised. So the hard thing is how to get those traditional brands that's, 1800s to, things like that to make that change. You know what I mean? And that's the most difficult things. And those are the people, if you stumble, those are the people that stumble. That's why I was a little bit surprised at Starbucks stumbling like that.
Yeah, right. Well, before we go, I want to bring it back around to Burrell Communications a little more specifically. Throughout my entire career, we had conversations about how are we reaching minority audiences or multicultural audiences. One of the big challenges, especially in speaking to our Black consumers, is, we had this total market approach. Where we looked at, how many GRPs are we delivering to all these different audiences. And as heavier consumers of media, we always said, okay, well, we can check the black box because we're over delivering GRPs to them. And then the work, the messaging, the creative sort of got put out to, whether it's a Burrell or a Tapestry or all of these sort of standalone, if you will, agencies, which then bifurcated the message, So how do you see the role of Burrell moving forward? I don't think that approach is going to be sustainable in the future, even if we're not still having the same conversation a year from now. I still don't think that's sustainable. So sort of speak a little to the future of multicultural messaging.
It's been very interesting because we've seen this again up and down, right? It was a time when, this agency Burrell was established in 1971. That time, you didn't see hardly anybody in Black commercials. You didn't see anybody in Black TV programs. You know what I mean? You didn't see any of that. And then there was a push for that. And we was very much over here. We did only work that ran in Black books, Black publications, Black TV networks, right? Then it moved on to when you start. Then it got now into the more total market thing. We went from, what is total market, right? And total market is really inclusion of everybody, but within that, which is very interesting, we have some very wonderful clients that embrace this, which is really cool, is that understanding it's a blend of both, because what our clients understand is that the African Americans, there's African Americans and there's African American influence. Like hip hop is the #1 selling, genre, but that's not because of Black people. There's not enough Black people. It's not, right? So we understand that that you can get to unique human insights coming through what I call the black door or the African American influential door, right? That bring new ways of thinking blending with the general market world. So it's a combination of working together with those two worlds that's the future. So as long as you have minority agencies that live in that space every day, they're going to bring you ideas and thoughts because they're in the community every day. That's where you get your hair cut. That's where you go to church. And you're going to hear a whole different conversation in an all black community that you're not going to hear somewhere else. So we are the earpiece to that community that you bring in to the general market, and you bring that together. Together, you work together with respect. And a lot of our clients, they're just this way, understand this. We work together and we get the best insight. So the best insight may come from an AA space, but it may work remarkably well for a total market. And we have discovered so many instances where that's true. And the clients say, hey, you know what? I love that insight. It connects to everybody. It's a fresh insight. So that's what we're going to run with it. And the bottom line is that things work well. They get great response. And that's the way to be. So as long as you have that 1-2 punch, we're going to be needed.
Excellent. So I want to kind of give you the last word, if you will. You know, we do want to be having this conversation a year from now. And I think one of the things that feels different about this is it's not about just our voices. People are hungry and looking for what can I do? What actions can I take? You know, we're all consumers of these brands. So you can either answer that question more broadly or answer it in the context of brands. But, you know, we've got what looks like about 125 folks on the call here. You know, what would you like to see us do going from here?
You know, I just would like to take this particular place we are in marketing history right now, and I like to move forward with it. Right? Let's this be a learning experience for all of us, you know, and let's use our footprints, let's use our influence, and whatever we do to continue to make this a better world and a better place. That's what the younger generation is asking the adults to do. And it's nice that brands are understanding we are more than a transactional relationship between you and your customer. If you're going to send me a birthday card on Facebook, then at least care about what I think. And it really is just that simple. Do what you can, the best way you can do it, because we need everybody to push this rock uphill. And it still is going to be uphill. There's no downhill yet. We're still pushing that rock uphill. Understand there's a lot of work to do. So please, please continue what you're doing, and we'll see you a year from now.
Well, thank you very much, Louis. This has been so enlightening and entertaining, as you always are. And a big thank you to all our alumni and students and friends of Newhouse, all who joined us today. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks for joining, everyone.